Hey, today let's play with GitHub Packages as a container registry. In advance of the exercise, let's get .NET 6 installed, freshly released as of recording this video, and Docker Desktop. All right, got a new directory for today's exercise. We're going to navigate to it in a terminal instance like you see here. And then let's create a new .NET Web API, and we'll do that via .NET New Web API. We'll give it a name, non-zero packages. We're working with GitHub Packages today, so let's name it that way. And then we'll put it in the current directory. And if we ls, we'll see, voila, we got our stuff. That's good. Let's mess around with the code a little bit, clean it up for what we're about to do. I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio Code, program, and then in here, I'm going to remove some stuff that gets in the way at times. I'm going to remove the HVS redirection. I'm also going to just enable Swagger inherently on any build. And with that, we should see something like this. Looks pretty good. The next step, I want to go into a controller. We have a weather forecast control already, so let's just use that. And I want to be able to take a configuration that's passed in, whether it's like an environment variable or something in the app settings, and I want to be able to output that to an endpoint. So we'll make a get endpoint and we'll return a configuration value. To do that, we're going to add the configuration, iConfiguration, to the dependencies that are being injected into our controller. And we'll just have those guys locally. Next, we'll create an endpoint that leverages that and reveals that configuration setting. We'll name it, we'll give it the route of configuration. That way we can reach it via the configuration route. Still within the weather forecast controller, so it'll be weather forecast configuration. That's fine. We'll just name it non-zero configuration for the method. That's sort of trivial in this use case. Doesn't really have much impact. Then we'll just return a string, which is the configuration value. It's going to be a string type, and it's going to be the non-zero value configuration. The next step, let's create a Docker file. The idea is we're going to be able to do configuration through the Docker file or Docker image and see that represented in what we return from this endpoint. So we'll start here, new file, Docker file, and then we'll fill this out with sort of just like a bootstrap of what is the Microsoft image for .NET. I'll do that real quick. So we've got the build environment where we grab our project, do a .NET restore for any dependencies, copy everything else locally, do a publish of that release configuration, and then we create our final build environment, which is just the ASP.NET runtime needs. We copy everything from the build environment over that we need there, and we run that. And that's running the package, that's output. So the name there matches the name there. That's sort of what's all happening there. All right, now back in the terminal instance, let's do a Docker build. We're going to name it the web API, that's what we're tagging it with. And we're just building the current context, right? So there's a Docker file in this directory. We're going to be able to just build it. Great. It built successfully. That's great. Let's do a run, and let's pass in a configuration for the environment variable non-zero value, which was our configuration. So Docker run it. We're running it. And then for the environment variable, we'll do non-zero value. That's what we had used before in the endpoint. And we'll set it to day, right? It's a non-zero day. Let's use the configuration day. We're going to pass just an arbitrary port as what's forwarded for 80. So 80 is what the image actually requires to have forwarded. We're going to put that to some arbitrary value on our side that I know isn't being used. 803 is what I grabbed. Great. Now if we do this, it should run our application. That's a good sign. This is a good sign. This is what good signs look like. And next we'll open this up in a browser. All right, so I'm at localhost 803, the Swagger page for our application. And you'll see we have our configuration endpoint. Now if all went well, we'll see a 200 with day as our response. Should be a string. If no configuration is set, you'll get a 204 no content, and it'll just not have content. Hey, we see day. That's great. Now, if you wanted to, you could go back through, run it, and change out your environment variable. So instead of day, you could pass in anything here, and that endpoint will return what you configured here. The next step, you're going to need a personal access token. To generate that, you would head on up to settings, we'll go to developer settings, personal access tokens, and you'll need to generate just a GitHub Packages personal access token. It really just needs to have the ability to write packages. Now I've stored that personal access token to a variable in my terminal instance. So what I can do is I can echo the crpat, which is that variable I've set it to, and then I'll do a login to ghcr.io. This is Docker login to the GitHub container registry. That's GitHub Packages. I'm going to pass in a username, which is your GitHub username, right? So for me, it's BoardTweak, but for you, it'll be whatever your GitHub username is. And then we're going to use password standard in, and this only works because we're piping that personal access token over to here. If you wanted to do it through a different means, you could just specify the password separately. But this will get us logged in to the GitHub container registry so that we can now go further and push our container image up to GitHub and say, hey, GitHub Packages, here's our image. Now let's tag that web API image so that we can push it up to GitHub and GitHub Packages. Do Docker tag web API ghcr.io, right? That's the GitHub container registry. / and you'll put your username here or your organization name. We're doing non-zero days, so we'll put non-zero days. You should do that in lowercase, so non-zero days, and then the name of the image that you actually want to push up. So in this case, non-zero packages was the name of our project, our C# project, .NET project. We'll do that, and then a version. So I'll put latest, which makes sense. It's sort of a magical string in Docker. Great. Now we should be able to do a push of this new image name that we created, this tag here, including the version. So I'll do a Docker push of this image, this whole image. And if I do that, we should expect that the Packages tab in GitHub gets populated. I haven't sent it yet, but I've opened up the GitHub Packages page. So that's just, if you go to your organization or your page for your own personal profile, there's a Packages tab here. So I see right here, there's no packages yet, but if I push this, thinking about it really hard. And then if I refresh, we've got our package up there. This is our image. Clicking into this, you'll see there's some information here. How do you pull it down? What information might be available in a README for this, and if this was specific to a repository. Package settings here allows you to manage access, do things like delete it, change who can access it in general. I could make this a publicly available one if I was on my private, on my personal page rather than having this be a part of the organization. If this is an organization and you don't have a paid organization, you can't adjust this visibility. That's worth noting. But generally, this is where you would go if you wanted to play with your image. Now that you have your image in a container registry, you can post this and rather deploy this to any of several different cloud platforms. And so in a future exercise, we might do that, posting this up to Azure and having this hosted in an app service. Today we built a .NET Web API, added a little configuration revealing endpoint. We built a Docker image from that, and we pushed that Docker image up to GitHub Packages as a container registry. And we did that all for free, which is, I think, pretty significant. If you have some extra time, you might check out the GitHub Packages documentation. I'll include that link below. But otherwise, I encourage you to look into this a little bit more, look into what you can do with GitHub Packages. If you don't have that extra time, well, congrats on a non-zero day.